It's been quite a week news-wise, starting off internationally with the storming of the Capitol building in Washington by the Trump supporters and the announcement of the availability of the COVID-19 vaccine. And then there was the ANC's traditional January 8 policy statement happening in the midst of a pandemic. And of course, that address happened virtually. Although some people said that, well, the production, no. What a mess it was. Well, I'm joined now by Newzroom Afrika's political editor, that's Sbu Ngalwa, and he speaks to me alongside Qaanitah Hunter. He is the political editor at News 24. My thanks to you both for making time to talk to me. Perhaps let's start with what is on the front page of the City Press, Qaanitah. That's the paper that belongs to your fold, and the headline there, the scramble to provide a vaccine, and it's all about this government effort to try and get the vaccines here in South Africa. And you talk there about the ambitious targets of government to try and roll this out. And then the Sunday Times, they are running with the headline that says South Africa's race to nab the jab hot up. And again, it's got to do with the minister outlining plans as families are wrenched by record tall COVID deaths. Qaanitah, some of what I've been reading, I don't know if it is believable. I tried to press the chairperson of the African National Congress, Xoli Mngambi, who was with me in studio here, to say over 300,000 people to be vaccinated in a single day. Is that even possible for a government that admits every so often that it is dysfunctional?
Yeah, the plan at the moment is vaccinating 316,000 people per day, as government needs about 6,300 care workers to undertake this mammoth task. We're obviously waiting now for the vaccine that we've had agreement with India to start the rollout for healthcare workers. But clearly, the devil is always in the detail. And when it comes to South Africa's vaccine plan, even when President Cyril Ramaphosa is pressed on it, he makes sweeping statements that government always had a plan, that money will not be an issue when it comes to procurement of vaccines. But we've seen this before. We've seen it before with PPE procurement not very long ago. And we saw the bungle that has happened there. The health minister and the president is trying to assure the nation that they have it under control, that they've done the groundwork, but that's going to be seen in the implementation of it.
Yeah.
The first of which was our problem is that, getting the vaccine, which now they seem to have secured 1 million doses. But the question will always remain as to how our healthcare service, which is already under pressure, is going to roll this out.
Yeah, and Sbu, I suspect that in the coming week, we may, and I use these words very advisedly, we may hear the health minister at least outlining some of what is captured here in the weekend newspapers about these plans, in particular to roll out the vaccine once it hits our shores. The question that I heard you pressing the president on is about the detail that Qaanitah is talking about, and in particular, transparency in as far as the monies and how this whole thing is going to be rolled out. Any explanations that were forthcoming on that front?
I think, Xoli, the reality is that the president actually kind of gave a blanket response in broad strokes about what is to happen, because the most important thing, in fact, even for health professionals and experts as well, is how are they going to roll this out? What are the specifics? Yes, we've heard of the 1.5 million doses, 1 million in January, 500,000 in February. How are they going to roll that out? And when is the start date? When are those doses arriving in the country? I think it's those kind of details. But also, more importantly, you've got a broader population, because the government, of course, is targeting 40% 70% actually of the population. That's what they said, that if we're to reach that herd immunity, that's about 40 million South Africans. Now, that's a lot of doses there. I think the other important thing, obviously, is the cost. Because when I asked the president actually about their plans for the poor as we are going, as we know that the 350 rand that has been received by unemployed people is coming to an end at the end of this month, he actually admitted that there's no money. He said there is no money, and actually suggested that the money that was being paid out to the poor, we know that was about 10 billion that went to unemployed South Africans. Now that the money will be redirected to the acquiring of vaccines. So those are the kind of details we need to hear about. And also there's always this reference to the Treasury, that the Treasury has now come on board. But it's important to hear actually how much has the Treasury put aside for this purpose, because we do know that in terms of the COVAX facility, that around 300 million came from the Solidarity Fund. Now, how much of this money is coming from, how much is government contributing into this program? So I think those are the kind of details that we require as South Africans, and also as the media, from the government at this crucial hour.
Yeah, Qaanitah, I guess the issue of corruption cannot be overemphasized. In your considered view, are we going to see much more transparency on the issue of the acquisition of this vaccine, given what we saw with the PPE procurement?
So for me, it's quite disappointing, Xoli, that we did not see greater transparency around this process, particularly because we have just come through a very recent history of corruption. When it comes to procuring PPE, there was corruption there. When it came to the TERS benefit and giving that fund from the UIF, we saw corruption there, where government employees, dead people, staff members of the UIF benefiting from that fund. With every single effort that government has made in mitigating the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been corruption. And so it's going to be completely idealistic of President Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration to think that there's not going to be anyone that's going to take advantage of the situation. Other countries have already raised concern about doses being stolen. And I mean, why do we think South Africa would be immune to such things? And I think that we need to have learned from 2020 by now, being more open, more transparent, and ultimately preparing for the inevitable and putting mechanisms in place to stop it.
Sbu, final point on this matter of COVID-19, whether it be the procurement of the vaccine and, of course, the related questions that people worry about in as far as corruption is concerned. The other element, though, that we are coming in for the hammering for as the media is that we're too soft on this administration. I was just reading an opinion by our very colleague, Justice Malala, who says we're very soft, and it is going to actually come back to bite us as media if we're not as diligent in exposing and being hard on the Ramaphosa administration as we were on the Zuma administration.
I think it's a fair point, Xoli, because obviously administrations differ. Perhaps for the media, coming from a Zuma presidency to a Ramaphosa presidency, that there may have been an element of where we took the foot off the pedal. Because obviously, I think the Zuma years represented the West that we've had in recent history. But I think it's a fair point to say that the media must remain consistent and continue to ask the questions. But the reality is, insofar as the Ramaphosa administration is concerned, the questions that we're raising now and the questions that have been raised and the questions that are being asked of the president, of his cabinet, of South Africa's response, particularly without going to other matters, just the recent one, the one we're discussing, which is the vaccine. I think it is the very pressure from the media that has actually propelled the government to come out with the details, including this sudden, as I would say, announcement. Of course, that we know there were discussions with various players, but to be forthcoming, because you know that followed a week or so of reports about how the government has missed the deadline. And what did that do? It prompted the government to act. So there obviously will always be that questions about the contestation, about whether the media is soft enough or hard. But I think the important thing is to be able to hold every administration to account. And quite importantly, on the issue of holding particularly President Ramaphosa to account, I think the South African media, including the South African National Editors Forum, has actually been quite clear and vociferous on the matter of the president not taking questions from the media after his press conferences.
Yeah.
He has actually committed to do that. He committed to do that in May. He did the same thing in September, but the reality is that it still has not happened. Where after, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, even the worst of presidents, including Donald Trump, we know that after a press conference or after he addresses the media, he takes questions.
Yeah.
Whether you like how he answers those questions is another story altogether. But I think from a transparency and an accountability point of view, it is important for the president and also for the members of the cabinet to be seen to be accountable.
Qaanitah, talking about the president, we saw him deliver the January 8 statement of the African National Congress, NEC. And your paper here, the City Press, talks about the ANC's Integrity Commission getting more staff. Will that translate to this Integrity Commission's recommendations biting and binding on those that have been found on the wrong side of the law?
I'm one of those people that believe the ANC's Integrity Commission is a PR body. It's a body that the ANC uses to make it look good, but it knows that it doesn't have any consequential meaning or standing in the party, because there is no one who has been successfully dealt with by the ANC Integrity Committee in at least a meaningful way. There's always appeals and cross appeals, and now you have a situation where the Secretary General of the ANC has been asked to step aside by this body. This was their recommendation of this body of elders had said that he has to act in line with the NEC resolution that if you are charged with corruption, you have to step aside. We saw that they were quite harsh against President Cyril Ramaphosa in relation to the Bosasa matter, but did not make a definitive finding. But the key issue has always been that this body does not have the depth, the experience, investigative capabilities needed when comrades go there and put up a case. But the reality of it is that it was never created for that reason. It was created as an ethical body, a body that's meant to provide some political direction, and it has sort of changed the scope along the lines, and now it has become the thing that effectively is meant to save the ANC, which frankly is setting it up for failure.
Yeah, Sbu, you get to have the final word on this ANC January 8 story. You sat with the president, asked him some tough questions. I want to use the president's own words, but it wasn't during the January 8 that he used these words. It was at the time of I think it had to do with the municipalities in South Africa. And he used the phrase that municipalities in South Africa have a crisis of believability and that of credibility. And I'm using these words on the ANC to say this party has a crisis of credibility and believability on the things that it says it will do. We are talking about an Integrity Commission that was meant to have teeth some time ago, still doesn't have them. Why is Ace Magashule still in office, by the way?
I think that's exactly the point here, Xoli. The fact that the ANC comes up with various resolutions, comes up with policies, strong policies, but the issue is always, as you pointed out to Gwedemantashe earlier, the issue of implementation. That is why the issue of Ace Magashule is not over yet. I sat with the president, who told me that at the next NEC meeting, assuming that will be by the end of this month, they will present the so-called guidelines that they were meant to present, to come up with, that will help the party deal with issues of leaders who are accused of corruption and how they should step aside. The reality is that that's what we heard from August last year. That's the point I made, that 5 months later, the officials still have not come up with these guidelines. And more importantly, the issue of people appearing before the Integrity Commission and being charged or stepping aside, no one has done that. No one has stepped aside. I made a point, I always make the point that at the NEC meeting that decided that Xoli must go appear before the Integrity Commission, there was members of the ANC who have been before told by the Integrity Commission to step aside, but are still in positions. One of them being the Deputy Minister of Finance, David Mason. He was part of that meeting. So how then, and I think that is where the fight back by the Magashule camp will be, is that why start with him when you've not dealt with others? And I think the ANC, while some may think that Magashule's issue will be resolved at the next NEC, or maybe in the next few months, I think it will actually take much longer, because all the time that the ANC talks about dealing with members who are accused of corruption, there's always a rider to that statement that the rules must apply consistently. And I think that becomes the nub of their argument, in that why start with him when you have not dealt with others? But lastly, Claudia, the ANC is fortunate, I must say, when it comes to being, yes, the issue of believability, and yes, it was punished in 2016 in the key metros, but the reality is that the opposition parties are imploding in this country. In fact, the Democratic Alliance is one party that is actually imploding and leaving the ANC enough room to be able to claw some of the ground that they lost. If you look at the by-elections, the ANC is doing very well. And we're going to a local government elections. We know that while the EFF has grown over the years and the support, it doesn't do very well at local government level, because their candidates are not attractive to the communities. And in terms of them winning wards, that is the biggest issue for the EFF that they've identified themselves. So where does that leave the ANC? It leaves the ANC with a chance of at least clawing back and winning back some of those places where they would have lost, not because they are a better party, but because we also do not have much of a better offering coming from the opposition parties.
All right. Let me ask the two of you to just briefly stay on, and we're going to take a short breather. When we return, we're going to wrap this up with the scenes that we saw at the Capitol Hill. That's further afield in the US. That's after the break. Very good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us, we're still in conversation with our politics editor, Sbu Ngalwa, and Qaanitah Hunter, the political editor at News 24. Qaanitah, very quick question to you. I don't know, frankly, how to phrase this one. How in the world does anyone explain what we saw happen outside the Capitol Hill in the US? So many people deciding to storm Congress in order to try and have Donald Trump stay on as president. And then he comes back, a day later to say those who did exactly what we saw on television, they're going to be dealt with by the law. Haibo.
Absolutely, that's exactly what my expression was when I watched those scenes from the Capitol Hill building in Washington. But what we mustn't forget, Brother Xoli, is that moments before that happened, Donald Trump was speaking to his supporters then January 6th, who had gathered in numbers, and sort of incited them against. We know that his vice president Mike Pence was chairing a sitting where they were going to accept the electoral college results. He insisted, without any information, falsely, that the vote had been stolen, and that almost incited those supporters to go and do what they eventually did, storming the Capitol Hill building, breaking in. We saw 4 people dead as a result of this. For me, however, I think the important part is that this is effectively the perfect culmination of the last 4 years of the Trump administration. This is what Trump did. Trump desecrated American democracy and brought into focus the real divide that is American society. It's not fringe people, it's not fringe groupings, people on the outskirts that are doing this. These are society. This is American society. And an important point that was made is that there shouldn't be a parallel to Afghanistan or Iraq or Belarus. This is America, and American exceptionalism must stop, because this is not a third world country. This is America, and this was allowed to happen in America.
Exactly. Qaanitah, and that's the point I want to pick up with Sbu, to say, firstly, Sbu, I don't know if I can remember any of this. I mean, I tried to research as much as I could before talking about this. Donald Trump is not going to attend the January 20th inauguration of Joe Biden. I don't know if it's ever happened. Just optics. How in the world is this going to look? But also, why should America lecture other countries when it comes to the acceptance of the will of the people?
I think Trump's announcement that he won't attend Biden's inauguration just cements the kind of president he has been, an infantile president, I must say. I mean, because it's quite a childish thing to do, because Trump lost, but the reality is that Trump lives in and seems to be living in an alternative universe where he still believes that he won an election. I think his concession, when you heard him conceding a day after the siege at the Capitol Hill, I don't think it was genuine concession. It was actually Trump under pressure, having seen what had happened, after he actually actively called on his members to march on Capitol Hill. And you heard some inflammatory words.
Some people, I'm sorry to cut in, some people have suggested that that speech actually surely was not written by Donald Trump.
I wouldn't be surprised. Absolutely. Because it didn't seem like Trump, but well, he still did not acknowledge that he still did not concede having lost an election. So it may not have been written by him, but it had Trump elements, or whoever's writing it clearly understand Trump. But I think the issue here, Xoli, is that for the longest time, America has sold this image of sold this American dream of to which all of the peoples of the world should aspire to. I think what a Trump presidency has done has actually brought to the surface all these underlying issues which America has done very well to keep under wraps. The issue of inequality, the issue of racism, which is still rampant. America may have abolished slavery in the 1800s, but the issues of racism and strong right-wing white supremacists are actually a very strong factor in America. And I think one of the biggest problems that Joe Biden is going to have in his presidency is trying to bring together those forces, because the reality is that 70 million people voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And if you saw what happened at Capitol Hill, if they have such sentiments and such people, and the problem with America is also the proliferation of guns. It's an armed society. Yeah. So those are the kind of issues that they have to deal with. That is why it is important that whatever happens in the next few days, actually someone is to be made an example of. Let's see if the Democrats will be able to go ahead, as they said they would tomorrow, that is to actually begin the process for the second impeachment of Trump. Because remember, he was impeached before, but because at that time, the other house, the Senate, actually blocked that. Now that the Democrats have the numbers, will they see through that? And we know also there have been calls for the cabinet of Trump to actually impeach him through Section 25 amendment. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. He's left with a few days, but I think for America's sanity and for its image, they have to do something about it.
Qaanitah, you have the final word. Might we see Trump prosecuted after he's gone from the presidency? Because the understanding is that a sitting president cannot be prosecuted.
Yeah, I think that's why we saw the bizarre indication from the White House that Trump is considering, pardoning himself, which is just completely bizarre and probably has no basis in law. But I do think that the Democrats will not take this lightly. Articles of impeachment have been drafted. They want to make an example for him now that they have both the Senate and the House. They want to, use their majority in the last 2 weeks before, or last week, before he leaves, to make an example of him, and almost as a payback for the 4 years that preceded. I think that what we saw from Donald Trump, as Sbu said, in terms of that concession speech that was not actually a concession speech, is not enough to erase what we saw beforehand. There was no basis for Trump and his campaign to claim that the election was stolen. They needed to accept the results, and had this been any other country, the US would have forcefully made sure that the election results and the will of the people reigned supreme. The reality of it is that this was the sort of end of that glamorous American democracy as we know it. And I think a lot more work needs to be done by Joe Biden and by Kamala Harris to bring together societies. We know that American commentators have been looking on the Nelson Mandela example in South Africa as inspiration to how to bring together this sort of effectively warring factions. But the reality of it is that they have their work cut out for them, and we are, I predict, not going to see the end of Trump and his tantrums.
Yeah, Qaanitah. And Sbu, I'm told that I can abuse you a little more. So we're going to take a short breather, because there is one specific story that we have not touched on, and it has been a tragic one. And that is that of the situation at our borders. Whether you look at Zimbabwe side of things, or Lesotho or Mozambique, it has been a nightmare for our neighbors trying to make their way into South Africa. So after the break, we're going to talk about that briefly. This is Newsfeed, the weekend edition. Sbu, don't move. What's happened to your feed, your picture?
Yeah, ngisekhona mchana.
Wenza ntoni? Intoni lo yenzayo?
Semapuna puna man. Still here, don't worry.
Very good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us, this is Newsfeed, the weekend edition. I'm still joined by our politics editor, Sbu Ngalwa, and News 24 political editor, Qaanitah Hunter. Sbu, I just had a conversation with the chairperson of the African National Congress, and an important admission, although we differed on the use of the word admission, because he says it's not an admission. And I say it is, and that is that the ANC appears to be admitting that it is being bullied by ZANU-PF.
Actually, it was quite startling, the fact that he admits to the threats. And the reality is, it's not new. I think from the Mugabe years, even at the time when, from the earliest memory I have, is when President Mbeki was in charge. And at the time, the explanation was that President Mugabe, there was always that father-son relationship, which was difficult. It was difficult for President Mbeki to tell President Mugabe what to do. I think it was one of the books I read, actually political books. It told us an anecdote of how the one day President Mbeki arrived for a meeting, and that he had to sit there waiting in the afternoon as President Mugabe was taking an afternoon nap. So that on its own, that on its own does show the kind of attitude that the Zimbabweans have held. One would have thought that with the departure of President Mugabe and a new president coming in Mnangagwa, that attitude would change, but it has not. I mean, this is the same Zimbabwe that keeps coming to South Africa for assistance time and again, yet they continue to treat South Africa in this manner. And also, more importantly, also is that ZANU-PF, which is the governing party in Zimbabwe, has not always had good relations with the ANC, because even during the struggle, the ANC were in alliance with Joshua Nkomo's party and not Robert Mugabe's ZANU. All that would have changed, obviously, after the in Zimbabwe gained independence. So I think some of these tensions that you see between the two are actually quite historical, and at the heart of that is the fact that they have not been historical allies in any case. But I think the concerning thing, though, is how you have all these thousands of people trying to get into South Africa, because here's the reality. South Africa is identified as a hotspot. It's a new strain of the virus and has got these thousands of cases being confirmed, but you still have people coming from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, and from Lesotho trying to push through, and even through illegal means, to get to South Africa, including that very image we see now, where they're trying to cross a crocodile-infested river with a crocodile inside. Yeah. That if nothing says desperate, if nothing shows desperation, I don't think there'll be any other picture or image that talks to the levels of desperation as that one of those people trying to cross through the Limpopo. I think that is also why South Africa actually has no incentive in being nice to Zimbabwe in terms of how it should get its house in order.
Yeah. Qaanitah, has there been a failure, though, in as far as planning is concerned, particularly on the part of our government departments that are managing these borders? Because we now know that it's not just the Home Affairs Department, it's about 7 of these departments. How in the world do 7 departments, how is it that they are unable to manage our border situation? Because we're not just looking at Zimbabwe, by the way, we're looking at Lesotho, for example. We're looking at Lebombo down in Mozambique.
Xoli, the thing is that the issue with South African government is that we shrug our shoulders, and you see it with the Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi, where I've done my part, it's health's problem, and then health saying no, but we need to have PCR tests done at the borders, and therefore that's why the queues are happening. And then when you ask about illegal crossing, it's the police that shrugs their shoulders and then points you in the direction of defense, and that is where the problem lies. The reality of it is that we could have foreseen this. We've already seen it happening just before Christmas, when we had outward movement obviously, where were those people going to go? They were not going to stay in Mozambique. They were not going to stay in Zimbabwe. They were going to return. And on top of it, South African government was timelessly informed that there's going to be this hard lockdown in Zimbabwe and could have foreseen the situation from a security perspective and from a public health perspective. Because what you see now at Beitbridge is super spreader event, really, where thousands and thousands and thousands of people are gathered, and their biggest fear is not the coronavirus. Their biggest fear is poverty. Their biggest fear is sleeping outside while praying and hoping they can just get over into South Africa for a better day. And the reality of it is that Aaron Motsoaledi says, he concedes that it may be a humanitarian crisis that's unfolding at the Beitbridge border crossing with Zimbabwe. But the reality of it is what happens now, because South Africa has already deployed all the healthcare personnel it can to the borders. It has deployed the army, it has deployed all the Home Affairs officials. And so now it's a matter of, are we failing? Are we conceding that we just cannot handle the situation? There needs to be a higher intervention, and not with dealing with the symptoms. The long queues at the Mombo border post is a symptom. The real problem is cooperation between different countries. And you've seen the pictures, Xoli. It is devastating that people wait 5 days at a border crossing, truck drivers unable to cross within 3 to 4 days. It really is a disaster. And the reality of it is that it needs to be dealt with in a holistic way. There needs to be leadership. They can't be management. We manage problems in South Africa. The Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration do not lead when it comes to these issues. And as a result, you have sort of piecemeal solutions being put to place. One day PCR tests will be, discarded. The next day, the border will be open till 9 p.m. The next day, there isn't a holistic solution in place, especially, Xoli, now that we have come into effect of the Africa Free Trade Agreement Act, where we want to see the free flowing of goods and the movement of goods across the continent. It's a pipe dream if you see what's happening in Beitbridge and in Limpopo and other border crossings that South Africa shares with its neighbors.
Qaanitah Hunter, thank you very much for your time and indeed your input this afternoon. She is News 24's political editor, and speaking alongside her is Sbu Ngalwa, our very own politics editor here at Newzroom Afrika.